Hello, everybody. So today we're going to be doing a super simple programming challenge. You can see kind of what our goal is up here. Create a function that takes a number as an argument, increments the number by 1, and then returns the result. And I got this challenge from Edabit.com, where I get a lot of my programming challenges from. And so you can see it has the same prompt that I've got inside of Visual Studio, and then it gives us some examples of input and output that we need to that under these conditions should result in whatever the number on the right side is. So if we pass in 0, then we get a 1. If we pass in 9, then we get a 10, -3, -2. So that's our goal today. So let's go ahead and just get started. So our function is going to return a whole number. We're only going to deal with whole numbers here. So we want to return something of type int. And then we want to give it a descriptive name. So we'll just call it add1. We want to pass in a single parameter. And we'll call that I guess number to add to. It's probably more verbose than it needs to be, but then we've got our body of the function. And so like our goal states, we want to return a number increased by a value of 1. And so what we can do is we can do it all in one line and just say return number to add to plus equals 1. We can actually do this a bunch of different ways. So let's actually go through them. So let's say, to make it, I guess, the most clear, let's make another integer and let's call it number to return. And let's just not initialize it yet. Or actually, let's set it, we can initialize it all at once. Or maybe it is best to do it in separate steps. We can say number to return is equal to number to add to plus 1. That's one way we could do it. And then we want to return to return. So that's going to return whatever number to add to has inside of it plus 1, and we're going to return that. So we can also do it a few other different ways just to make it kind of all kind of in line, or make it simpler. So we can also just say we can declare it all at once, or we can kind of make this less verbose by just doing it all in one line, or at least one less line. We can say int number to return is equal to number to add to plus 1. And this will work as well. And then we also need to do our return statement. So return number to return. So that's another way that we could do it. Another way we could do it is say return number to add to plus equals 1. And that just will basically take the number here, and it will just return the value of whatever this variable has inside of it plus 1. So that is the simplest we've gotten so far. So we broke it down to just be one line. And then we can actually even make it more simple than that. There's even multiple ways to kind of write there's kind of different ways to return this plus 1. We could say return number to add to, or plus number to add to. And so what we're doing here is we're basically saying let's add 1 to the number to add to and then return this value. And it's important to do this as a pre-increment rather than a post-increment. So if you do number to add to plus, it will actually increment this variable after it's already been returned. So it's actually going to return whatever value is inside of number to add to before it even adds the 1 to it. So we want to make sure that it's a pre-increment rather than a post-increment, so that we for sure get that additional value, or we just add 1 to the value. So that's another way we could do it, and we can actually make this all super concise by using something called a lambda expression. So a lambda expression is basically just what this kind of little arrow signifies. It basically, you only want to use lambda expressions if what you can do can be done in a single line, and it just serves to make code just less, I guess, burdensome to read. So right here we've got, these brackets. There's a lot of overhead here for what we're actually doing. We're doing something very simple. We're just adding 1 and we're returning it. So if you want something just super simple, super in line, you can have a lambda method or lambda expression here. And we can say we want to just return number to add to plus or plus number to add to. And it will return number to add to plus 1 is what we're doing there. So yeah, that's our lambda expression. We'll do it this way just because I feel like it's the simplest. It's really easy to read. You can see add 1, we're returning number to add to, plus plus, with a pre-increment in front of it. So pretty simple to follow, and it makes it less verbose than having something, with a whole body. It's just easier. Just nice little shorthand there. So now let's test our method. So let's say int number, and we'll set it equal to 0. And then we'll say int number after is equal to add 1, and we'll pass in number to it. And why is it yelling at us? Oh, it's not. We're fine. So we're going to pass in number into add 1, and we'll get a number after, or we'll see what values instead of number after we pass it to add 1. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. Let me just write console.read key here so our program doesn't just terminate, and then we'll step through this one by one so you can see kind of what's happening here. So let's kick it off. Awesome. So right now number doesn't, well, I guess all integers are have a default value of 0, but we're actually going to initialize it to a value of 0 here. So number should have a 0 inside of it, which it does, and number after will have a 0 too until we pass number into this add 1 method, which we've written down here. And then we'll have number plus 1, which is 1. Should have the value 1 after we step into this. So if I press F11, I can go into the method, and we can see that we're adding inside of this method we have our variable number to add to, which currently has a value of 0 because we passed in number into it, which we initialized to 0 up here. So right now number to add to has a value of 0. And if I press F10, step through that, then we can see that down here program main.add1, which is this method, returned a value of 1. So if I press F10, we can see that number after will have 1 inside of it. So now we've got our number variable, which is 0, and we have number after, which is equal to 1, because we just added 1 to it. And now if I press F10, our program will terminate. So there you go. Program's over. Okay, so let's verify some input from the user to let them add 1 to whatever number they want to. So let's set our variable still. So int number is going to be equal to console.read line from the user. And this is going to yell at us because it's saying, hey, we want this method, this read line method is returning a string, and number is of type integer. So we need to parse an integer from whatever the user is passing in here. So we need to say int.parse console.readline, and boom, there you go. So we're going to read whatever is inside of here. And it's still yelling at us saying possible null reference for parameter s and int.parseString, which it's basically saying that the user can pass in nothing, and that could potentially be a problem, which we can worry about here in a minute, but we're not going to concern ourselves with that right now. So let's actually prompt the user by saying console.writeLine, and we'll say, please enter in an integer value. And then it should output it to us after we decide to put this number variable into our add1 method. So now let's output our integer to the user. So we'll say console.writeLine, and then we'll use string interpolation here. So this little money sign that I'm using in front of these quotes is basically saying anything that you put inside of brackets, inside of this string here, I will use the .toString method on it. And what the .toString method is every object in C# has a method called toString. And so that will basically make it text that is outputable to the console. Or, it'll make it a string that you can put in any method or function that needs a string. You can use it wherever strings are used. And so we'll go ahead and write to the console, add1 number, and then we'll have a little text before it. Your number plus 1 is add1 number. So it will use the toString method on whatever the result of this function is. So we're going to add 1 to this number, and then we're going to output it to the console, is what we're doing here. So if I go ahead, my program's still running, but if I start it again, and then it says, hey, please enter in an integer value, and I say 10, then it says your number plus 1 is 11. Great, awesome, our program's working. It's usable at this point, but we still have some issues here. So if I start this program one more time, and I write, a string, then it's going to break because it's trying to parse an integer from ASDF, and it's telling us that over here, saying the input string was not in the correct format. So let's put together a loop to basically prompt the user over and over again until they give us a value that's legitimate. So we'll just declare our variable int number up here, and then we're going to create something called a while loop. So let's actually just comment this for now because we're going to want to grab that here in a second. So while, and then let's create a bool variable that says bool did get input successfully. And then we'll just set that equal to false first. And then while did get input successfully. So while, let me explain kind of what's going on here. So on line 7, I'm declaring this variable. Let's just say did get input, so did get input successfully, because that's a little wordy. And we're initially going to set it to false. And then we have this while loop here that has a condition up here at the top that basically says, while this condition is true, we're going to loop through whatever is inside of this body. And so I put an exclamation point before did get input because we want to loop through this body while did get input is equal to false. We could also write it this way, which might be more helpful. While did get input is equal to false, then we'll loop through this. We could also write it while did get input is false. We could do that as well. We could do all those things. So while did get input is false, we're going to prompt the user over and over and over again. So we'll say, console.writeLine, please enter an integer value. And then we're going to attempt to parse it up here. So let's copy that, put it down here, remove this semicolon and set it equal to int.parse console.readline. Now this will throw an exception. So we want to account for that exception using something called a try-catch block. So try, and we'll say try number equals int.parse console.readline. We're going to try to parse a value into here over and over and over again. And if we never end up getting a value, or if we try to parse a value that isn't a number, isn't an integer, then we'll catch the exception that is thrown. We can actually just remove this line because we're not actually planning on doing anything with the exception. And then by default, just kind of the template autocomplete that Visual Studio gives you, it just will throw the exception again. So our program will still break, but instead of breaking the program, we just want to prompt the user again. So we're going to say continue. And what continue is doing is continue basically says, hey, just go back up to the start of the loop and go through it again. And go back up to the loop and go through it again. So the way that our program is written right now is it will break on line 15 if we get a value that isn't actually a number. And then when it breaks, it will get caught, the error will get caught, the exception will get caught, and we will just start up at the top again. But the problem is that we don't have an exit condition. Did get input is never set equal to true. So if this line succeeds, it will go on to this next line. And here we can say did get input is equal to true. And then it will break out of this while loop that we have here. And so down here, this is screaming at us, I assume, because, yeah, number isn't assigned. So we can actually give it a default value here because our for loop, or excuse me, our while loop will just continually loop forever until we get a value inside of it. Like, there's no way to break out of this while loop without getting some kind of input into our number variable here. And this is still giving us a warning saying possible null references for this string parse, or the parsing of this string that we're going to get from console.readline. But we're not really concerned about that. So let's go ahead and give our program another spin and see what happens. So let's go ahead and start it up. And it will say, or should say, well, it looks like it didn't do anything. So let's start up again. There we go. Please enter an integer value. So if I enter in something that will break it, it caught the exception and it's prompting us again. So as long as I keep entering in nothing, then it's not going to let us add 1. And if I put 90, then it'll say your number plus 1 is 91. So boom, we've got a program that's a lot more robust here. we can step through it. Let's go ahead and step through it just to make it even more clear. We can remove this comment. We don't need that comment here. Let's go ahead and step through this. So return next integer, int number equals 0. Let's step over that. Looks like number has a value of 0 inside of it. Step over this, did get input is equal to false. So while did get input is false, we're going to prompt the user, please enter in an integer value. So we're going to try to parse something from the user. So it'll say, hey, give us something. So let's enter in something that won't work. And here we go. We caught our exception. Input string was not in a correct format. We're going to go into our catch block and we'll continue. So we go back up to the top. We check our condition. Did get input. It's still false. So we're going to go into our block here. We'll write to the console, please enter an integer value. And we'll prompt the user again. So now let's enter in something legitimate. So let's say -10. And looks like it parsed it just fine. We can see that number has -10 inside of it. And did get input is equals, it's about to be set to true. So we step over that line and look, it's set to true. So we go to the end of the block, we go back up to the top, did get input, it's no longer false. So we're going to break out of our loop, and then we're going to write to the console, add 1 plus our number, which is -10. So we should get an output of -9. Should be the result. Then look, there we go. Your number plus 1 is -9. Boom. So that's our program. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I really hate squigglies under anything. So if we want to really get rid of this, then we can cut it from there. We can say var s is equal to console.readline. And then we can pass in s as our value here. Now it's still yelling at us saying possible null reference. So we can say if s is equal to null, then just continue. Let's start over because we really shouldn't have a null value inside of readline. I'm not even sure how that would happen. I've never actually had that happen when reading from the console, but we're just going to start over and prompt the user again because s is null. And we can actually make this more shorthand. So with if statements, if let's actually reset this to be string too, just to make it clear. Actually, I'll explain both of these things. So right here, we're saying var s equals console.readline, and var is kind of just it can take whatever is on the right side of this equal sign. It can take the assignment of, you know, whatever the assignment ends up being. So it could be, you know, just a string, or it could be of any type of variable. It could be of any type, just in C#. It could be any type. Let me kind of explain what that means. So right here, it's implying that s is going to be of class system.string. And the reason it knows that is because console.readline is returning a string. And so it knows, okay, I am of type string because console.readline only returns strings. I can also say var, you know, k is equal to 10, and it will know, okay, I know that 10 by default is an integer, so I'm just going to imply that my type is of type int, which you can see here. It says int k, and you can see that it's system.int32. And I could also say, you know, var k is equal to, you know, ulong 10, and it will imply that this is supposed to be, you know, a unsigned long, or, you know, a long, or I could even say float, or float might not like that, or maybe look at that, even that works. So when you use the keyword var, it can determine based off of whatever you're assigning to it what type it's going to be. Is basically what the var keyword is actually telling you. And so I can set it to explicitly be string, just to make it more clear. But let's go with var. Oh, I didn't mean to build, but I built on accident. But we can keep it as var. And then we can check if s is equal to null, then we can continue, which just will start the loop over. So that's what we're doing here. So what's happening here is, instead of kind of a shorthand thing similar to what we did with like the lambda expression, is there's nice little shorthands you can do in C#. So here we can just say, you know, if s is equal to null, or we can just use this, which is super nice too, s is null, then just continue, start the loop over, because we can't parse a null value. There's no way that's going to happen. So we can just remove these brackets, and it will just take whatever the next line is after the if statement, and it will execute it if this condition is true, is what's happening there. That little shorthand removal of the brackets there. And you don't even have to have it indented here. I just like to have it indented. You can even just leave it there. If S is null, you just say continue, and that will work too. So that is, I think that's it for our programming challenge today. Let's just run it one more time, just for kicks and giggles. So please enter an integer value, and it's not gonna let us put in something that's illegitimate. So it'll say, you know, even decimals it won't be a fan of, but if we put in, you know, a whole number, it'll say, hey, your number plus 1 is 901. So that is our programming challenge for today. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one.